Hi, welcome to CG Dive. In this video, I'll introduce a brand new add-on called Bonera. Bonera is a large collection of useful rigging tools, so I cannot describe the add-on in a single sentence because it is a Swiss Army knife of sorts. But in the next minute or so, I'll try to highlight some of its main features, and if it sounds interesting, please stay around for the rest of the video, where I'll go into much more details, show you practical examples, and so on. So here are some highlights. With this add-on, you can set up an armature for a hard surface character with a few clicks. You can fully automate the IK setup process. You can quickly rig pistons. And these are some of the more flashy features, but really the strength of this add-on is automating boring tasks that would otherwise take a long time. One of the big features of the add-on is creating bones and parenting scene elements to these bones. I said scene elements because the add-on adapts to whatever you throw at it. It can quickly parent objects to an armature's bones, or vertices, or faces, or the control points of a spline, even the bezier handles, or you can add bones to existing bones. And if you prefer empties instead of bones, that's not a problem either. The add-on can do all of the above with empties instead of bones. And there are a host of other features. I'm not going to be able to go over all of them, but there is an utility that helps you speed up renaming bones, vertex groups, or shape keys. The add-on can also create UI sliders for your rig controls and so on. So there are just a couple of things that I have to get out of the way before we continue. First, this is a paid add-on. It will cost around $30 as far as I know, but do check the product pages for details. I am not the creator of this add-on, but I am affiliated with it. If you buy through my links, which I'll share in the video description, I'll get a commission. But regardless, I'm not trying to make you buy the add-on, I'm just showing you what it has to offer and you can make up your own mind. This add-on is created by BlenderBoy. If you follow CG Dive, you know that he also created the Game Rig Tools add-on based on CG Dive workflows. So I'm familiar with the creator, I know that he's very capable, and I trust him. If you need help with the add-on, if you want to suggest a feature, you should get in touch with BlenderBoy, not me. And that way you'll be getting information right from the source. So once you buy and download the add-on, you'll be able to install it. Installing an add-on in Blender is easy. You just go to Edit, Preferences, click Install, find the zip file that contains the add-on. You can use the search field here, and here I'm going to choose the Bonera Toolkit zip file. Then make sure that you also enable the add-on, and then it will be ready for use. While we are here, let's expand the information about the add-on. In this area, you'll be able to access the add-on documentation. This documentation will be very useful because this add-on has a lot of features. I'm going to try to introduce you to quite a bit of them, but if you're still not sure about a certain feature, you can access the manual and look it up. Beneath it, the add-on has a bunch of handy options. One of them is panel name. So the add-on features will appear in the end panel here, in the side panel, in the Bonera tab. However, if I wanted to, I can move it to any other tab or just rename the tab. So for example, if I type tool, the Bonera features will appear under the tool tab. And if I type some random name, then that name will appear here. And since this end panel tends to get very cluttered, I'm always happy when add-ons add this panel name option. This is something that all add-ons should have. The add-on also allows you to turn some of its features on or off. So if you find out that you never use certain parts of the add-on, you can simply disable them from here and declutter your interface. Again, this is very nice, especially with a feature-rich add-on like this one. So in this video, we'll be focusing on the Bonera Toolkit features, but I'm going to leave these options to default. Next, we have affixes lists. And here you can set up prefixes and suffixes that you'll be able to add on the fly while using this add-on. I'm going to click this Load Recommended button, and that will add a couple of common prefixes and suffixes for me. I can add more, of course. If I often use the prefix FDF underscore, I can add it here. And for example, if I prefer the suffix .l rather than _l, I can double click here and rename it. In this case, I'll leave it as it is, and I can also add another suffix and call it .l and .r. The next tab, default name, it lets you define certain naming conventions for specific features of this add-on. So I may come back to these options when I'm introducing these features. And finally, hotkey is very important. The add-on allows you to access all of its features With this shortcut, the default one is Ctrl-Shift-A, and you can, of course, click here and change it. I'm going to leave it to default. So let's start exploring the functionality of the add-on. I'll be focusing on the Bonera Toolkit functions. One of the main features of the add-on is that it allows you to parent existing geometry in your 3D scene to bones or empties, and it creates these bones and empties on the fly. And it also does so very intelligently. So depending on the mode you're in or the kind of geometry that you have, the add-on adapts to your choices and it parents the selected geometry in the most logical way. So let's see how it works. Here I have a couple of random objects. If I select them, and then go to Bonera Toolkit and create bones from selected, and just click OK with the default options. The add-on created an armature and a bone at the pivot point of each object. And now if I select the armature that was created and go to pose mode and move some of the bones, you'll see that the objects were parented to these bones, and they were parented with the armature modifier and weights. So if I select one of the objects, go to modifiers, you'll see that an armature modifier was added for me. And in object data properties, a vertex group was created and assigned to this bone. Now this is the default behavior. Let's undo and see what we can do if we change some of the options. So again, I have the object selected. I'm going to create bones from selected. And instead of individual, I can press median and press OK. So that created just one bone. And if I select it in pose mode and move it, you'll see that it moves all of the objects. So median parents all objects to a single bone. I'm going to go back to individual, and you'll see that here we have an option which allows us to determine where the bones will be created. They can be created at the object origin, at the center of the bounding box, and also there is a geometry option which will kind of make the bone gravitate towards the area with most vertices in the object. So I'm going to move these origin points around a bit. And now if you go to Bonera and create bones at the origins, you'll see the bones appear at the origins. Undo. Instead, if we place them at the bounding box, you'll see the bone kind of appear at the center of each object. And by the way, after we pressed OK, the add-on gives us this modular menu that we can tweak, and we can see the changes on the fly. So if I switch to geometry, you'll see the bones change their positions accordingly. Now, as soon as I do something else, the modular menu will disappear and the changes will become permanent. Let's undo again. If we look at the options again, we have this use hierarchy option by default, and that will take into account the hierarchy of these objects, if there is any, when it creates the armature. So let's parent these objects to each other. The cone is parented to the cylinder, and cylinder to cube. And now if I select all objects and create bones with the use hierarchy option, the bones will also be parented in this same hierarchy. I'll undo again. Let's keep exploring the options. We have some bind options, and by default, the add-on binds or parents these objects to the newly created armature using weights. As you saw earlier, it created an armature modifier and vertex groups. And here we have some additional options that you can tweak. The defaults will give you the most predictable results, but if you need to change some of these options, you can do so. Now, instead of using weights, the add-on also allows us to parent the objects directly to the bone. Let's choose this option and press OK. And you'll see that no vertex group was created for these objects here. But still, if I go to pose mode for the armature and move the bones around, it will affect the objects. Now, as you probably know, if I select an object and then an armature and go to pose mode, I can then select a bone and press Ctrl B, and that will allow me to parent directly to a bone. And that is what the add-on is doing in the background. So let's undo. And I'll switch to weights again. And next we have the tail options. And by default, the add-on will orient all the new bones that it creates in global space, and it will point the bones upwards. Let's press OK and try to play around with these options. These values here are the offset values for the tail of the bone. So the thick part of the bone is called the head and the thin part is called tail, and the head position is determined over here. For example, I can switch it back to geometry, and then we offset the tail from that position. And if we just use this value, which is the Z value, we will basically affect the length of this bone. And if we use the other values, they'll kind of move the bone sideways. We have two more options here. One is 3D cursor, and that will make the tails of all bones snap to the current position of the 3D cursor. If I move the cursor around and then choose a 3D cursor option again, then the tail position will be recalculated. We can also flip the bones. That will work independent of the mode that we are in. Either way, we can flip the bone. And the other option that we have is to switch the offset tail mode to local. And now nothing will happen. And that is because all of my objects have applied rotation. So let's undo. And I'm going to kind of randomly rotate these objects around. While I was pressing undo, I actually removed the parenting between the cylinder and the cube, but that doesn't matter anymore. So let's just select these objects and create new bones and set this option to local and press OK. And you'll see that the newly created bones are now aligned with the rotation of the individual objects. And again, if I tweak this value, I can make the bones longer or shorter, and then the other values will kind of move the bones sideways, which usually I'm not going to want, but there may be cases when I do. Okay, let's undo. And we kind of went through most of the options for this feature. The last one is Armature, and it allows you to create a new armature on the fly or to use an existing one. So let's see what happens if you have an existing one. I'm going to create a new armature, single bone. And let's go to edit mode and create some random bones in there. So this is my Armature 001. I'm going to go to object mode, select my objects, and create bones from selected. And for Armature, I'm going to click existing and choose my Armature 001 and click OK. And what happened is the add-on kept our existing armature and added new bones to it. So when you use an existing armature, it doesn't overwrite it, it just adds new bones to it. Okay, now I'm going to reset my scene and show you more features. So I already mentioned that the add-on is quite adaptable and intelligent, and it just does the correct thing depending on the mode you're in and the type of object that you have. So far, I showed you how to work in object mode, but if I just select one of the objects and go to edit mode, the add-on can still function properly. So I'm going to go to vertex mode and select some vertices on the top of this cylinder. And again, I'll create bones from selected. And now we have a very similar menu as in object mode, but it is a little bit different. Again, we have individual or median. Individual will distribute bones to the individual elements in edit mode that we have selected, and median will create a single bone that affects all selected elements. Now, if we choose individual, we can choose between vertices, edges, or faces. So here I'll just keep it to individual and vertices, and you'll see that the add-on created one bone per vertex. If I go to the armature and try moving the bones, you'll see that each vertex in our selection is parented to one of the bones. So each bone controls one vertex. Let's undo and try it again. This time I'll switch to edges. And you'll see that now one bone is created per edge. If I switch to faces, currently we only have one face here, so one bone was created to control this face. So let's undo, and actually I'm going to select this ring of polygons and create bones again, individual faces, press OK, and now I have one bone per face. Now median obviously will create a single bone that will control the vertices that I selected. Now something interesting is that, as you probably know, Blender supports editing multiple objects at the same time. So if I go to object mode, select multiple objects, and then go to edit mode, I'm able to manipulate the vertices of all of these objects at the same time. And now if I select vertices from each object and then create a median bone, Bonera will create a new bone, and that bone controls the vertices of multiple objects. Here we have options that are very similar to what we had before, so let's skip those and let's move to using empties. So we just saw how we can create bones that become controls for our selection, whether we have selected objects or vertices or edges or faces. And using this add-on, we can do basically the same, but instead of bones, the add-on can also use empties for this purpose. So let's select these objects and click Create Empties from Selected. Just use the default options. And the add-on created empties. I'm going to increase their size a little bit. And these empties are the parents of the objects. Let's undo. Again, here we have similar objects as with the bones feature. So I think they'll make sense to you right away. Again, we have control over the orientation. So if I rotate these objects a little bit, and then create empties in local mode, then they will be aligned with the rotation of the objects. We have binding modes, and in this case, we just have either parent or none. This was also available for the bones. I didn't mention it explicitly. You can set binding to none, which means that the empties or bones will be created, but the elements won't be parented to them. So if you just want empties, for example, without any parenting, you can choose none here. And there we go, we have empties at the position of each object, but without any parenting. Now if we go to edit mode, it's interesting how the empties handle this mode. I'm going to select some vertices and create empties. And now binding is set to none, but if we do want binding, we have the option to use hooks. Again, notice how the add-on adapts to the mode that you're in. So I'm going to choose hook and press OK, and you'll see that we have empties created for each vertex. I can also change the type of empty, so let's say a cube, and make it smaller. And now each of these empties controls a vertex. And if you go to object mode, select this object and go to the modifiers, you'll see that a great amount of hook modifiers have been added. And if you've added hooks manually before, you know that it is quite time consuming, but with this add-on, you can add as many hooks to as many vertices that you want with just a couple of clicks. So I'm going to select and delete these objects, and I'm going to create some sort of armature. I'm going to use the Rigify MetaRigs just to have something interesting. And now if I go to pose mode for this armature and select all bones, I can actually add empties to all of these bones. And I can add the empties at the head, tail, or center of the bone. Let's go for head first. And there we go. Now, even though this setting is set to local, the empties don't seem to be aligned with the bone orientation. But if I choose roll, then we have something that is aligned with the bone orientation. So then I can also go for empties in the center of the bone or at the tail of the bone. And this can be very useful in rigging. Okay, I can even add bones to the bones. So I have all bones selected. I'll choose create bones from selected, choose individual, and let's place the bones at the center and press OK. I can play with the size a little bit. Let's see what happens if we switch to local. Not much in this case. But if we switch to roll, then we have some sort of alignment between the existing bones and the newly created ones. And again, you'll see that the armature options have intelligently changed for this mode that we are in, which is pose mode for bones. So I can choose own armature, which is the same armature that I'm editing. or I can choose Armature and create a new armature. So the newly created bones will be in a new armature. Okay, the add-on works with curves as well. Here I have a curve object with a couple of curves. Now, if I just select the object and create either bones or empties in object mode, I'll just create a single bone that controls this curve object. So that's not what I want. I'm going to undo and then select the curve object and go to edit mode and select all vertices or all vertices that you want to affect. Let's say that I only want to affect these. And now again, I can use create bones from selected, and let's go with the default options. And now I have bones that control each of the control points of this curve object. And honestly, I'm not sure how this is done manually. Yeah, it uses hooks again, but if I had to do it manually, I probably would have gone to Google and tried to figure something out. But with Bonera, you can do this kind of stuff on the fly without thinking much about how it's done. You just click the button and it's done for you. Let's undo. I can also create bones for the Bezier handles. And that gives me full control over this Bezier curve. But it is all done using bones. Okay, undo. And I can do the exact same thing using empties. Here the size of the empties is a little bit too small, so I'm going to increase it. Maybe switch it to a sphere. And if I want, I can also have Bezier handle controls as well. That will create additional empties. And now I'm able to control all of these control points using empties. So I think that's more or less enough for these functions. I'm repeating myself, but I think you see how adaptable these features are. And I'm not even sure if I showed all of the available modes and variations of these two techniques. Maybe there is a mode that I'm blanking on right now, but if there is, you'll be able to discover it easily. Now let's move to a more practical example. I'm going to go to this collection where I have this train-looking model, and I have already parented it. So each of the cars are parented to each other, and the wheels are also parented to their closest car. So I can select all of these objects and create bones from selected. I'm going to go with the individual option. Origin is fine. Use hierarchy. Yes, that is very important because our objects are in a hierarchy that we want to take into consideration. Bind options, I'm going to leave to weight. Offset, I'm going to switch to local, and I'm going to create a new armature and press OK. So for the tail options, I used local. You can also use global for sure. In that case, all of the bones will be aligned in the same position. I'm going to switch to local to be able to distinguish between cars and wheels easily. And now I have an armature that is controlling my train. While we are here, I can show you another feature of this add-on. You can easily add bone shapes for your bones with this button here, Apply Bone Shape. I'm going to click on it, and that allows me to select a type of widget. So here I want to go with some sort of circle. So there are a bunch of circles, or there's also the gear one. Let's go with the gear one. And the other options I'm going to leave to default and press OK. And now the new widget is actually aligned just as I want it, but I may want to scale it down a little bit here with the scale value. Bonera also places these widgets in a separate collection, and you can change the name of this collection. If the shape wasn't aligned properly, I can use the offset and rotation values to align it as I want it. And I can see all changes in the viewport, so that is very easy to do. So I may want to move the shape a little bit away from the actual wheel. Okay, and I can keep doing this. The previous settings are saved, so I can keep adding the same shape. Now I would expect that if I selected multiple bones and applied a bone shape, that will be applied to all of the bones, but that's not the case. It's only applied to the active bone. So that is probably something that Blender Boy can update in the near future. For the cars, I may want another shape. Maybe some sort of arrow. And now if I want to align this arrow with the direction of the train, I can probably rotate it minus 90 degrees on the z-axis and 90 on the x. And there we go. Make it a little bit larger. And apply the same shapes for the other cars. The widget collections you may want to hide actually. Okay, I pressed undo to remove the armature that we created. And Bonera actually has another way to create armatures. If I select all objects again and go to Bone Tools, Bone Chain from Object Hierarchy, and I'll just press OK. And again, the add-on created an armature and parented these objects to the armature, but it also creates connecting bones between the individual bones. Okay, here is another scene where this feature makes more sense actually. We have this hard surface robot. Its body parts are split into individual objects and they're parented to each other. So if I select all of these objects, go to Bone Tool, Bone Chain from Object Hierarchy, and press OK. Bonera created this armature for me and also parented all of the objects for me. And again, this is something that can save you a lot of time in these types of hard surface rigging scenarios. If we go to our curve again, in this menu, you'll find another option that is useful for curves. I'll go to Edit Mode, select all of my control points, and then go to Bone Tools, Bone Chain from Curve, press OK. And I'll also add bones for the Bezier handles. And this created an armature for a curve that is even more logical than in the previous example. It's a little bit difficult to see the curve, so let's give it a bevel. And now you can see how you can control these curves. And this can be useful, for example, if you've rigged your character's hair with curves. So let's keep exploring. This generator section has functions to automatically create IK controls and another one which helps rig a hydraulic piston. So let's create a new armature. I'm going to quickly create something that looks like a human leg. And now in pose mode, if I select this bone, the shin bone, and just generate IK, I'll press OK with the default options. So here Bonera added a IK constraint and some bones. To see the bones better, I'm going to increase their size here. A pole target was also created over here. It is too far from the actual leg, so let's undo. And I'm going to do this again, generate IK, OK. And then while I'm here, I'm going to adjust the distance, the offset distance. Here's the pole target. And I'll increase its size, and here with distance I can set up how far it is from the knee. So setting up an IK leg is not that difficult, but it is still nice to have it automated and sped up a little bit. So we have another feature to rig hydraulics, and that's why I have prepared this piston looking thing. However, first we need an armature, so let's use the other functions of the add-on to create the armature. I'm going to select both objects and create bones from selected. I'm going to create bones for each object at the origin of the object and press OK. Here I can set the tail to be at the 3D cursor, and that will align these bones so that they point at each other, which is exactly what I want. Now in edit mode with individual origins, I'm going to make them a little bit smaller. And here you'll see that Bonera already parented my objects to the bones. And now all I need to do is select both bones and go to generator, generate hydraulic. And here we have a couple of options. The main one is what type of constraint will be used to create the piston effect. And to me, dump tracked work best, but you can experiment with the other modes. And depending on the situation or your needs, each mode is probably useful. So dump truck, and I'll press OK. And here the add-on created these helper bones, which are a little bit small. In edit mode, I'm going to scale them up a little bit. Okay, and now in pose mode, if I move this control, we have this piston-like effect. And of course, since this is my control, I can add a shape to it. Maybe hide these bones, the deforming bones, to layer 2. And now very quickly, I have rigged this piston. So something I forgot to mention is the affixes that we saw earlier in the add-on options. If you remember, if I go to my add-ons and look at the Bonera options, there is the affixes settings, and here I created a bunch of prefixes and suffixes that I can use with this add-on. The way this works is it is available anytime you generate bones. So for example, if I select this object and go to create bones from selected, in here I can actually name the bones that will be generated, and I can also give them a prefix. So let's say that these are mechanism bones. And also a suffix. Let's say that this is the right side. Press OK. And now if I look at the bone that was generated, you'll see that it has the MCH prefix and _R suffix. There are a couple of interesting utilities here that we can look at. Here I have a bunch of objects, and some of them have some sort of parenting, but others are unparented. So if I select all of these objects, and then I'll make sure that I make this object the active object. Then if I go to utility or from parent, and then I'll switch limit to selected and press OK. And that basically kept any existing parenting, but any object that didn't have a parent was parented to the active object. So there we go. This object became the root of the whole group, but the existing parenting was kept intact. And this also works for bones the same way. I just have to be in edit mode. And again, I have in pose mode certain type of parenting here. If I go to edit mode, select everything, and then make this root bone active, I can go to utility, orphan parent, press OK, and this bone became the root of all objects, but the existing parenting was kept intact. Parent object to bone name, I'm not going to demonstrate, but basically if you have bones and objects with the exact same name, this function will parent them together. The next function is kind of interesting. If I have an object and a bone, and I parent the object directly to the bone, so Control P and bone, then this function will convert this type of parenting to weighted parenting. Just press OK, and as you can see, a vertex group was added and also an armature modifier. And now this bone still controls this object, but instead of direct parenting, we have weighted parenting. This can be useful. Smooth all weights. Basically, if you go to weight painting, under weights, there is this smooth function, and you can set it to all. And this utility, smooth all weights, does exactly this, but without having to go to weight paint and so on. So it's just a shortcut. Here I created two more objects. If I go to create vertex group from object, you'll see that a new vertex group was created. It is named exactly as the object. And if I go to edit mode and click select, you'll see that all vertices were assigned to this vertex group. And same for the other object. Constraint to armature. I'm also not going to demonstrate here. It basically lets you constrain two armatures when they have matching bone names. Then we have a little cleanup menu, which is meant for cleaning up armatures. So you can remove custom properties, animation data, non-deforming bones, and bone shapes from your rig. And these functions are meant to strip your rig from anything but your deforming bones. And that can be useful when you want to simplify your armature. So that's about it for the Bonera Toolkit functions. I'm going to wrap things up, but before I go, I'll quickly mention the other areas of the add-on. We have a pseudo bone layer. To use it, we're going to need an armature. So let's unhide our train. And I'm going to create a bone chain rig for it. Now I can start creating my bone layers. So the first one I'm going to name cart 1. And I'm going to select the bones in this area and click assign. Now that these bones are assigned to this layer, I can easily hide and unhide them. I can select them with one click. With this button, I can make them deforming or non-deforming. I can also keyframe all bones on this layer with a single click. So I'm going to select some more bones, create a new layer, and call it cart1 wheels, and assign the bones. And again, I can do the same things. Hide and unhide, select these bones, make them deforming or non-deforming. So as you probably know, Blender's default layer system is quite old and limited. But before you get too excited about this new layer system, the creator of this add-on himself does not consider this new system to be a replacement for the built-in system. The main reason is that this layer system only works when the add-on is installed. So if you share your rigs with other people, they won't be able to use the same system that you're using. This layer system can still be very useful while you're working on your rig, while you're creating it. But when you finalize your rig, make sure that you use the default bone layers. If I have any armature selected, I can easily add UI elements to it with the UI slider generator. So I'm going to create a new parameter and generate a slider. And in pose mode, a functioning slider was generated for me. Now I just need to link it to a property of my rig and I'll be able to use it. Okay, the last feature that I'm going to show you is the list renamer. And the list renamer can rename a list of bones, shape keys, or vertex groups. And this feature is useful when you want to rename a standard list of names to something else. So for your usual renaming tasks, you can keep using Blender's rename and batch rename. But when you have a standard list that you need to rename, then this tool can be useful. So for example, if I have the human meta rig in my scene, and let's say that I don't like some of the names. For example, the forearm I may want to call lower arm. Something that actually bugs me about the meta rig is that the neck bones are called spline and also the head bone is also called spine. So let's create a new renamer list. Give it a descriptive name. And then I'll click load names and I'll load the bone names of the meta rig. Press OK, and this will give me a list of all of the names of the meta rig. And now next to forearm, I'm going to type lower arm. And same on the right side. This can be neck 1, neck 2, and head. And you can add alternative names for all of the other bones. And if you don't want to change some of these names, then you can either put the same name on the other side, or you can simply remove the entries that you don't want to rename. Okay, now I'm going to click rename list. And my lower arm is called lower arm and the necks are renamed and the head as well. And now I can export out this list as a JSON file. And then every time I have a new meta rig, I can quickly load it and rename my bones. So this way you can automate common repetitive renaming tasks. And as I said, this also works with vertex groups and shape keys. For that, I'll need an object. And now I can add a new list, load names, and choose vertex groups. And here are the vertex groups, and I can rename them on the other side. And I can also add another list. And in here, I'm going to load my shape keys. And again, I can rename them. There we go. And that's it. I think we managed to cover a lot of the features of this new Blender add-on in this video. If you find it interesting, if you find it useful, you can find it on the Blender Market and GUMROAD. If you're interested in rigging tips in Blender, or working with Blender and game engines, or simply like to learn about new tools like this one, subscribe to CG Dive and turn on the notification bell. I hope to talk to you soon.